In the beginning, before dynasties and emperors, before the scrolls of wisdom and the drums of war, there was a land shaped by rivers and mountains where myth and memory intertwined. Ancient China did not emerge overnight, but slowly, across millennia, in fertile basins and along mist-veiled slopes. The story begins in the cradle of civilization, along the Yellow River, known in Chinese as the Huanghe. It is here, in these loess-covered plains, that the earliest seeds of Chinese identity were sown. The people of the Yellow River Valley learned to tame the waters and grow millet. In the more southern regions near the Yangtze River, rice cultivation began to flourish. These communities lived in modest dwellings, often semi-subterranean, clustered near sources of fresh water. They crafted tools from stone and bone, fired pottery with geometric designs, and buried their dead with simple rites, early expressions of social cohesion and emerging beliefs. But the earliest tales of China are not carved in stone or inked in scrolls. They are sung in the voices of myth. The mythological rulers, Fu Xi, Nuwa, Shennong, and the Yellow Emperor, Huangdi, loom over the prehistory of China like shadows of memory. They did not build palaces or lead great armies, but gifted humanity with essential knowledge. Fu Xi was said to have taught people how to hunt, fish, and domesticate animals. Nuwa, his consort or sister in legend, molded human beings from yellow clay and repaired the sky after a cosmic disaster. Shennong, the divine farmer, introduced agriculture and medicinal herbs. Huangdi, the Yellow Emperor, was said to have brought order through laws, calendar reforms, and even early music and warfare. Though modern historians do not accept these figures as literal individuals, their stories preserve values deeply embedded in Chinese culture: balance, ingenuity, harmony with nature, and the sacred role of rulers. The Yellow Emperor, in particular, came to embody the ideal of enlightened rulership. His imagined battle against the rebel Qiyu became a symbol of civilization triumphing over chaos. Archaeological evidence places the beginning of organized Chinese society in the Neolithic era, with the emergence of distinct cultures like Yangshao and Longshan. The Yangshao culture, flourishing around 5000 BCE, is known for its painted pottery and matriarchal social structures. Their villages reveal a growing sense of community, as seen in the remains of communal dwellings and granaries. Tools became more refined and burial practices more elaborate, indicating a budding spiritual life. By 3000 BCE, the Longshan culture had risen in the Central Plains. Their black pottery was smoother, wheel-made, and more technically advanced. Fortified settlements appeared, hinting at conflict and organized defense. The social structure became more hierarchical. The transition from Yangshao to Longshan represents a key stage in the development of early state formation in China. Metal tools began to replace stone, and elite graves contained jade ornaments, symbols of authority and ritual significance. These Neolithic societies left no written records, but their material remains speak to an emerging civilization, one rooted in both the practical and the sacred. The significance of jade, for example, endured for thousands of years in Chinese culture. It was believed to possess moral qualities, purity, durability, and beauty. Jade ritual objects, especially bai discs and Kong tubes, were placed in tombs as offerings to the heavens and earth. Over time, tribal groups began to consolidate power. According to tradition, the Jie dynasty was the first to rule China. Though long regarded as legendary, some scholars now consider the Xie plausible, based on archaeological finds at Erlitou. This Bronze Age site, dating from around 1900 BCE, features palatial structures, sophisticated bronze casting, and evidence of social stratification. While direct links to the Xie remain debated, Erlitou represents a bridge between myth and history. The idea of dynastic succession, already present in the tales of ancient rulers, began to take root. Chinese civilization would evolve with a powerful sense of continuity, of one era building upon another, of rulers acting as stewards between the human world and the cosmic order. This belief would eventually crystallize into the concept of the mandate of heaven, though it had not yet been named. In these early ages, time was measured not by emperors, but by the rhythms of nature, the flow of rivers, the turning of seasons, the cycle of the moon. Communities lived in concert with their environment. Agricultural calendars, developed over generations, marked the planting and harvesting of crops. Even without formal governance, there was order, an order born from observation, adaptation, and shared experience. One of the most striking features of ancient Chinese development was its relative geographic isolation. Natural barriers like deserts, mountains, and seas shielded early Chinese societies from many external influences. While trade and migration certainly occurred, the foundational elements of Chinese civilization, its myths, its agricultural practices, its social hierarchies, emerged with a unique internal coherence. This would foster a strong sense of identity that persisted even as dynasties changed and borders shifted. In the realm of spirit and thought, early Chinese cosmology emphasized balance and duality. The ideas that would later be formalized as yin and yang, heaven and earth, ancestor and descendant, already permeated the worldview. Shamans played a vital role in mediating between the material and spiritual realms. Rituals, often involving music, fire, and offerings, sought to maintain harmony between human beings and the forces of nature. Burial sites from the Neolithic period show increasing complexity. Some individuals were buried with tools, ornaments, and food, suggesting a belief in an afterlife or, at the very least, in the symbolic importance of honoring the dead. Ancestor veneration, which would become a cornerstone of Chinese tradition, likely began in these quiet, earthen tombs. By the end of this formative chapter in Chinese history, the foundation had been laid, not only in agriculture and craft, but in worldview and ritual. The people of ancient China saw themselves not as separate from nature, but as part of an intricate cosmic cycle. Their leaders, whether real or imagined, were tasked with maintaining this balance, not through domination, but through wisdom and moral strength. As bronze tools began to replace stone, and the first signs of written symbols appeared on pottery and bones, China stood on the threshold of its first dynasty. The age of myth was ending. The age of history was about to begin. When the mists of myth began to part and the echoes of ancient legends gave way to the tangible remains of cities and tools, China entered a new chapter in its civilization, the Shang Dynasty. This was the first dynasty for which we have definitive archaeological evidence, and it marks a profound transition from Neolithic village life to a more centralized and hierarchical society. The Shang Dynasty is believed to have ruled from around 1600 to 1046 BCE, centered along the Yellow River Valley. Its capitals moved several times, with the last and most well-known being Yin, near modern-day Anyang. It is here that archaeologists uncovered one of the most significant troves of early Chinese history, the oracle bones. The oracle bones, tortoise shells and ox scapulae, were inscribed with characters and then heated until they cracked. Diviners interpreted the resulting fissures to answer questions about agriculture, warfare, weather, and royal affairs. These inscriptions form the earliest known system of Chinese writing. Though rudimentary, the script on oracle bones is recognizable to modern readers as an ancestor of today's Chinese characters. These bones speak volumes, not only about the beliefs of the Shang people, but also about their concerns, fears, and hopes. Questions recorded include, will it rain tomorrow? Or will the king's hunt be successful? They reveal a society deeply concerned with fate and the favor of ancestral spirits. The king himself was regarded as the chief priest, the intermediary between the living and the divine. The Shang political system was based on kinship. The royal family ruled directly over a core territory, while related clans and loyal nobles governed surrounding regions. These aristocratic families offered tribute to the king and were often tasked with military and administrative duties. Power was passed through the male line, and royal succession could be turbulent, especially during moments of internal conflict or external pressure. Beneath the nobility, a structured social hierarchy emerged. Artisans, bronze workers, farmers, and slaves formed distinct classes. Slavery was common, particularly for war captives who were used in both labor and ritual. Evidence from burial sites suggests that human sacrifice, particularly of servants or prisoners, accompanied the deaths of elite figures. Tombs of Shang kings were vast and richly furnished, sometimes containing dozens of sacrificed individuals, horses, and lavish goods. Bronze technology reached remarkable sophistication during the Shang period. The dynasty is renowned for its intricate bronze vessels used in rituals. These vessels, often decorated with taoti, a symmetrical, stylized animal face, were not merely artistic expressions. They served ceremonial functions used in offerings to ancestors and deities. The complexity of Shang bronzes required highly advanced casting techniques, indicating a strong division of labor and centralized control over resources. In addition to bronze, the Shang produced objects from jade, bone, ivory, and pottery. Jade remained a material of immense ritual significance. Weapons and chariots also evolved during this time. Bronze-tipped spears and axes gave Shang warriors a clear advantage in combat. Chariots, drawn by horses, appeared on the battlefield and in ceremonial contexts, suggesting contact with steppe cultures to the northwest. The Shang also left behind large walled settlements, evidence of organized urban planning and defensive concerns. These cities featured palaces, temples, and granaries, indicating centralized governance and resource storage. Workshops were often arranged in specialized quarters, and craft production became an important part of the economy. Artisans worked in state-controlled settings, producing items for the elite rather than for private markets. One of the key legacies of the Shang dynasty is the codification of ancestor worship. Families venerated their forebears, believing that ancestors could influence the fortunes of the living. This belief system supported the authority of the king, who claimed descent from powerful ancestors and conducted elaborate rituals to secure their favor. Ancestral lineage was not just a matter of pride, it was a source of political legitimacy. Shang religion blended animism, ancestor worship, and elements of natural philosophy. The people believed in a hierarchy of spirits, from local deities to a supreme sky god known as Dai or Shangdi. Unlike later religious systems, Shang religion lacked formal doctrine or temples. Its practice was centered on ritual, sacrifice, and the diviner's connection to the spirit world. Music, dance, and feasting often accompanied these ceremonies, reinforcing communal bonds and reaffirming the king's role as spiritual leader. Despite their achievements, the Shang were not invincible. Over time, internal rivalries and external threats weakened their grip on power. Frontier tribes grew stronger, and vassal states began to chafe under Shang authority. The dynasty's end came at the hands of the Zhou, a rival group from the west who claimed the Shang had lost the mandate of heaven, a concept that would define Chinese political philosophy for centuries. The transition from Shang to Zhou was not merely a change of rulers, it marked the beginning of a new ideology. But the Shang legacy endured. Their writing system laid the groundwork for Chinese script. Their bronze technology influenced later dynasties, and their religious practices set the stage for millennia of ancestor veneration and ritual culture. As we move from the Shang into the Zhou era, we witness not only the continuation of civilization, but its evolution. The Shang had brought order, craftsmanship, and belief into sharper focus. They taught their descendants how to speak to the spirits, shape metal with fire, and bind people together with ritual and blood. Though buried beneath layers of time, their voices still whisper through cracked bones and tarnished bronze, telling the story of one of humanity's oldest and most enduring civilizations. With the fall of the Shang dynasty around 1046 BCE, China entered a new era under the rule of the Zhou. The Zhou dynasty would become the longest lasting in Chinese history, enduring in various forms for nearly 800 years. While the early Western Zhou period maintained strong central authority, later centuries were marked by fragmentation and philosophical flowering. Yet, through it all, the Zhou established ideas and institutions that would define Chinese civilization for generations. The Zhou were originally a semi-nomadic people from the Wei River Valley in the west. Their leader, King Wu, defeated the last Shang ruler, King Zhou of Shang, in the decisive Battle of Muye. This victory was not only a military triumph, but a moral one, at least according to Zhou historians. They claimed that the Shang had grown decadent, cruel, and unworthy of rule. To justify their conquest, the Zhou introduced one of the most enduring concepts in Chinese political thought: the mandate of heaven. The mandate of heaven was not a divine right in the Western sense. Instead, it was a conditional contract between the ruler and the cosmos. Heaven, or Tian, granted authority to virtuous and just rulers. But if a king became corrupt or failed in his duties, heaven could withdraw its favor. Natural disasters, rebellions, or famine were seen as signs that the mandate had been lost. This idea legitimized both the Zhou conquest and future dynastic changes. It offered moral structure to political power and a mechanism for renewal. In the early years of the Western Zhou, the new rulers attempted to consolidate their power over a vast and culturally diverse territory. To do this, they implemented a feudal system known as the Fengjian system. The king granted land and titles to loyal relatives and allies, who governed their fiefs in return for military and ritual obligations. This decentralized arrangement helped control distant regions, but also sowed the seeds of future division. Despite the challenges of governing such a sprawling realm, The early Zhou period was a time of cultural integration and institutional development. The Zhou standardized rituals, ceremonies, and political titles. They built altars, temples, and ancestral halls. Bronze inscriptions during this period became more elaborate, reflecting both administrative decrees and religious dedications. These texts often emphasized virtue, loyalty, and lineage, core values in Zhou ideology. Society during the Zhou dynasty became more stratified. At the top was the king, followed by hereditary nobles, then ministers, warriors, artisans, farmers, and slaves. The division of roles was reflected in dress, language, and burial customs. Nobles were buried with elaborate bronzes and jade, while commoners had simpler graves. Ritual life centered around the veneration of ancestors and heaven, with music, sacrifice, and dance playing key roles in public and private ceremonies. The Zhou period also saw the gradual codification of early Chinese law. While much was still governed by custom and tradition, written codes began to emerge. The idea of moral conduct, known as eli, became closely associated with legal order. Li referred not only to ritual propriety, but also to social etiquette and ethical behavior. Over time, these concepts would form the basis of Confucian philosophy. By the 8th century BCE, the authority of the Zhou kings began to wane. In 771 BCE, the capital at Haojing was sacked by invading tribes, and the Zhou court relocated east to Luoyang. This marked the beginning of the Eastern Zhou period, which is further divided into the Spring and Autumn period and the Warring States period. Though the Zhou kings retained nominal authority, real power increasingly resided in the hands of regional warlords and noble families. Paradoxically, the decline of central power spurred one of the most intellectually vibrant eras in Chinese history. As local rulers competed for dominance, they also patronized scholars, philosophers, and strategists. This gave rise to the 100 Schools of Thought, a golden age of Chinese philosophy. Confucius, or Kongzi, lived during the late Spring and Autumn period. He was deeply influenced by the Zhou legacy and sought to restore its ideals. For Confucius, the key to harmony was a return to ritual propriety, moral rectitude, and filial piety. He believed that rulers should lead by example, cultivating virtue to inspire loyalty and order. His Analects preserve conversations and teachings that emphasize benevolence, ren, righteousness, why, and respect for tradition. Other philosophical traditions also emerged. Daoism, attributed to Laozi, emphasized natural harmony and the ineffable Dao, or Wei. Where Confucianism advocated structured society, Daoism preferred spontaneity and simplicity. Legalism, in contrast, argued for strict laws and harsh punishments to maintain order. Each school offered different answers to the question of how to govern and live in a time of chaos. As these philosophies matured, they shaped not only intellectual life but also political practice. Competing states adopted different ideologies. Some embraced Confucian ideals, others implemented legalist reforms. The diversity of thought reflected the fractured nature of the era, but also a deep desire for unity, justice, and cosmic alignment. Back in the Zhou court, kings became figureheads, presiding over a shrinking realm. Yet the Zhou dynasty lingered, a symbolic presence in a land increasingly defined by warlords and shifting alliances. Its decline was gradual and its influence profound. The rituals, concepts, and language developed during the Zhou period formed the foundation for much of what followed. Even as power fragmented, the idea of China as a unified civilization, bound by culture, language, and tradition, persisted. The mandate of heaven, the reverence for ancestors, the importance of virtue in governance, these legacies endured long after the Zhou kings had faded into history. In this way, the Zhou dynasty did not merely inherit the world of the Shang, it reimagined it, infusing Chinese civilization with a moral and cosmological framework that would guide it for centuries to come. The centuries following the decline of central Zhou authority ushered in one of the most turbulent and transformative periods in Chinese history, the time of the Warring States. Between the 5th and 3rd centuries BCE, the land once held loosely together by the Zhou feudal order fractured into competing kingdoms. These states, each with their own ambitions, armies, and philosophies, vied for dominance through alliances, betrayals, reforms, and near-constant warfare. This era was defined not only by conflict, but also by innovation. To survive and expand, states had to evolve. Warfare changed. Armies grew larger and more professional. Iron replaced bronze, enabling mass production of weapons. Crossbows became widespread, and infantry began to outnumber chariot forces. Military strategy became a discipline in itself, with treatises like Sun Tzu's The Art of War laying out principles of deception, flexibility, and calculated force. Governance also underwent transformation. States no longer relied solely on hereditary nobility. Instead, they began to recruit talented individuals, regardless of birth. This meritocratic shift gave rise to a new class of administrators, legal scholars, and strategists. Among these, legalism found fertile ground. Rooted in the belief that strong laws and centralized control were essential for stability, legalist thinkers advocated strict punishments, rewards for loyalty, and absolute authority for rulers. One of the key architects of this new order was Shang Yang, a legalist reformer in the state of Qin. In the mid-4th century BCE, Shang Yang implemented sweeping changes. Land was redistributed, hereditary privileges abolished, military ranks based on merit established, and harsh penalties instituted to enforce discipline. These reforms transformed Qin from a backward frontier state into a rising power, feared and respected by its rivals. While Qin was modernizing, other states were also consolidating power. The states of Chu, Qi, Yan, Zhao, Wei, Han, and others engaged in a delicate balance of diplomacy and warfare. Treaties were signed and broken, coalitions formed and betrayed. Fortresses sprang up across the landscape. Great walls were built to secure borders and control trade routes. The Zhou kings remained in name only, distant relics of a faded order. Culturally, the Warring States period was paradoxical. Amid the violence, intellectual life flourished. The 100 schools of thought continued to develop, with Confucianism, Daoism, Mohism, and legalism offering competing visions of society. Thinkers traveled between courts, offering counsel to kings, debating ethics and statecraft. Libraries were founded and scrolls copied. Philosophy became not just a matter of personal reflection, but a tool of state. Despite their differences, many states began to adopt similar administrative practices. Centralized bureaucracy, land registration, tax collection, and standardized weights and measures became common. These measures strengthened the states, but also made them more similar. Eventually, one would rise to unify them all. That state was Qin. Qin had several geographic advantages. Located in the western frontier, it was shielded by mountains and rivers, which helped protect it from early incursions. Its rulers were pragmatic and often adopted reforms earlier than others. They embraced legalism with zeal, building a strong, centralized government, a disciplined army, and a clear chain of command. Qin's success also lay in its leadership. In the late 3rd century BCE, a young king named Ying ascended the throne. Ruthless, intelligent, and ambitious, he set his sights on total unification. Supported by capable ministers like Li Si, he launched a series of brutal and effective campaigns. One by one, the rival states fell. By 221 BCE, Ying had conquered all opposition and declared himself Shi Huangdi, first emperor of a unified China. It was the end of the warring states and the beginning of the Qin dynasty. But before we move forward into that era, it's important to understand what this unification represented. The wars of the preceding centuries had done more than redraw borders. They had changed the fabric of Chinese civilization. They had broken the power of the old aristocracies and elevated the state as the supreme force. They had encouraged philosophical reflection, technological progress, and administrative reform. The violence was immense, but so was the growth. When the smoke cleared, what remained was no longer a loose network of feudal lords under a symbolic king. It was an empire, a new kind of state, governed by law, sustained by merit, and held together by the vision of a single ruler. The unification achieved by Qin was not simply military, it was ideological. It marked the triumph of a new political philosophy, that order, strength, and unity could be imposed from above by the will of one man acting as the voice of heaven. As the last kings of the warring states vanished into history, their lands absorbed, their titles abolished, the memory of their struggles would linger. The era had been defined by conflict, but it had birthed something enduring, the foundations of imperial China. And now, with Shi Huangdi ascending to power, the nation stood on the brink of a new, awe-inspiring, and often terrifying chapter. In 221 BCE, after centuries of warfare and fragmentation, the land that would become China was unified under a single ruler. Ying, king of the Qin state, declared himself Shi Huangdi, the first emperor. It was a title never before used, one that signified a new kind of sovereignty. He did not claim to be merely a king among kings, but the ultimate authority, the apex of political and cosmic order. With this proclamation, the Qin dynasty was born, and imperial China began. The rise of the Qin was not accidental. It was the culmination of decades of institutional reform, legalist philosophy, and military innovation. The Qin state had long prioritized merit over birth. Officials were promoted based on ability, not aristocratic lineage. Land reforms had weakened the power of noble families and empowered individual farmers. A strict legal code enforced with uncompromising discipline ensured social order and state control. Once in power, Shi Huangdi and his ministers set about transforming the newly unified territory into a cohesive empire. The diversity of languages, laws, currencies, and systems of measurement across the former warring states presented a challenge. In response, the Qin implemented sweeping standardizations. A uniform writing system was enforced throughout the empire based on the Qin script. Currencies were unified, with round bronze coins becoming the standard. Weights and measures were regulated to ensure consistency in trade and taxation. Infrastructure played a key role in unification. Thousands of miles of roads were built or expanded, radiating from the capital at Xianyang. These roads facilitated communication, military movement, and trade. Canals were dug to connect river systems and support agriculture. The empire was divided into commanderies and counties, each governed by centrally appointed officials who reported directly to the emperor. This broke the power of local warlords and ensured loyalty to the central state. Perhaps the most iconic project of the Qin dynasty was the Great Wall. Though walls had existed before, Shi Huangdi ordered the linking of existing fortifications and the construction of new ones to form a continuous barrier along the northern frontier. This wall, built through forced labor, was meant to protect against nomadic incursions, especially from the Xiongnu. It symbolized both the might of the empire and the immense cost of its ambition. The Qin legal system was harsh and unforgiving. Legalist principles dominated governance. Laws were simple but strict, and punishments severe. Collective responsibility was enforced. If one person committed a crime, their family or entire community could be punished. This created a society of intense discipline and fear, but also efficiency. Corruption was ruthlessly suppressed and order maintained. Despite its effectiveness, the Qin regime was not loved. The empire demanded much from its people. Massive construction projects, high taxes, and military conscription placed enormous burdens on commoners. Dissent was met with brutal repression. In a controversial move, the emperor ordered the burning of many historical texts and the execution of scholars who opposed legalist orthodoxy. This act, intended to unify thought and eliminate dissent, became infamous as the burning of books and burying of scholars. Shi Huangdi himself was a complex figure. He was tireless, ambitious, and obsessed with control. He toured his empire frequently, inspecting works and issuing edicts. But he was also consumed by a fear of death. In his later years, he sought the secret to immortality, sending expeditions in search of elixirs and mythical islands. Ironically, he died during one of these journeys in 210 BCE while traveling through eastern China. His death was concealed by his advisors, who feared instability. Eventually, his son, Qin Shi, was installed as emperor, but he lacked his father's strength and vision. The centralized system, so tightly wound, began to unravel. Rebellions flared across the empire, driven by resentment toward forced labor, taxation, and the regime's rigidity. Within just 4 years of Shi Huangdi's death, the Qin dynasty collapsed. Though short-lived, lasting only from 221 to 206 BCE, the Qin dynasty left a deep and lasting legacy. It established the blueprint for imperial rule, centralized administration, standardized systems, legal codes, infrastructure, and the concept of the emperor as the ultimate authority. Later dynasties would adopt, adapt, and in some cases soften the Qin model, but the foundations remained. Perhaps the most haunting symbol of the Qin legacy is the mausoleum of Shi Huangdi. Near modern-day Xi'an, this vast complex contains thousands of life-sized terracotta warriors, each uniquely carved, standing in silent ranks. They were meant to guard the emperor in the afterlife. Discovered in 1974, they remain one of the greatest archaeological finds of the 20th century. The Qin dynasty's story is one of paradox. It brought order through force, unity through suppression, and progress through sacrifice. It showed what was possible when a state was organized for efficiency above all else. But it also revealed the dangers of excess, rigidity, and fear-driven rule. As the Qin fell, civil war engulfed the land once more. Out of this chaos would rise a new dynasty, one that would seek to temper legalist severity with Confucian values, a dynasty that would endure for centuries and define much of what the world would come to know as Chinese civilization. That dynasty was the Han. With the collapse of the Qin dynasty in 206 BCE, China once again descended into civil war. Amidst the turmoil, a former peasant and soldier named Liu Bang emerged victorious. He took the imperial title of Gaozu and founded the Han dynasty, which would last with interruptions for over 4 centuries. The Han era became a golden age of Chinese history, a time of political stability, cultural flourishing, and far-reaching influence that extended from the heart of Asia to the Mediterranean world. The Han dynasty is typically divided into 2 major periods. The Western Han, 206 BCE 9 CE, with its capital at Chang'an, and the Eastern Han, 220 CE, based in Luoyang. Between them was the brief Qin dynasty of the reformer Wang Mang, whose radical policies led to social upheaval and his eventual downfall. Unlike the Qin, the Han rulers sought to temper authoritarian rule with Confucian ideals. While legalism remained an element of governance, Confucianism became the official state philosophy. Education, ritual propriety, and moral virtue were emphasized, especially for those who served in government. The imperial court revived and expanded the civil service system, creating a meritocratic bureaucracy that selected officials based on their knowledge of Confucian texts. This system laid the groundwork for China's administrative model for centuries to come. Economically, the Han government encouraged agriculture, standardized taxes, and controlled key industries such as salt and iron. The population grew, trade expanded, and internal migration brought new lands under cultivation. Farming innovations, such as the iron plow and improved irrigation, helped sustain larger communities. Market towns and cities grew in size and complexity. Artisans and merchants became increasingly important, though Confucian ideals often viewed commerce with suspicion. One of the most significant achievements of the Han dynasty was the expansion of Chinese territory and influence. Under Emperor Wu, who reigned from 141 to 87 BCE, the Han launched military campaigns to secure borders and expand the empire. These efforts led to the defeat of the Xiongnu nomads in the north, the incorporation of Korea and parts of modern Vietnam, and the extension of Chinese authority deep into Central Asia. It was during this time that the Silk Road began to take shape. Though not a single road, this vast network of trade routes connected China with the civilizations of the West, Persia, India, and even Rome. Chinese silk became a prized commodity abroad, and in return, traders brought back glassware, horses, spices, and new ideas. While the average farmer in Han China never saw these foreign goods, the elite adorned themselves in imported treasures, and the empire profited from customs and diplomatic prestige. Culturally, the Han dynasty produced a remarkable flowering of arts, literature, science, and historiography. Sima Qian, the court historian, compiled the records of the Grand Historian, a monumental chronicle of Chinese history from legendary times to his own day. His work established a model for historical writing that emphasized moral judgment and continuity. Han scholars also advanced astronomy, mathematics, and medicine. They refined calendars, cataloged stars, and developed theories of yin and yang to explain health and illness. Inventions such as the seismograph and water-powered mills reflected a growing sophistication in engineering. Paper, first developed during the Han, revolutionized communication and record-keeping, though its widespread use would come later. Religion and cosmology during the Han era were diverse. Confucian rituals dominated public life, but Daoist thought flourished in private. Popular religion included ancestor worship, nature deities, and magical practices. Toward the end of the Han period, Buddhism entered China via trade routes, gradually taking root in monasteries and among lay believers. Family life was structured by Confucian ideals. Filial piety, respect and obedience toward one's parents and ancestors, was central. Households were patriarchal, and lineage was carefully maintained. Women's roles were largely domestic, though some gained influence as scholars, poets, or members of the imperial court. Despite its achievements, the Han dynasty was not without challenges. Court intrigue, eunuch factions, and corruption weakened central authority. Natural disasters and famines led to social unrest. Peasant revolts, such as the Yellow Turban Rebellion in the late 2nd century CE, shook the foundations of the empire. Regional warlords began to assert autonomy, and the unity of the Han began to crumble. By 220 CE, the last Han emperor abdicated, and China entered a new period of disunity, known as the Three Kingdoms. Yet the legacy of the Han endured. The Chinese people came to identify themselves as Han, a term that remains in use to this day. Han institutions, philosophies, and cultural practices continued to shape Chinese civilization long after the dynasty's fall. The Han dynasty was a bridge, connecting the fragmented past with an imperial future, linking China to the wider world and laying the foundations for what many would later see as the essence of Chinese identity. It had taken the raw material inherited from the Qin and refined it into something durable, complex, and distinctly Chinese. As the Han faded into legend, the empire it built remained a model for those who came after. And in the memory of the people, the Han was not just a dynasty. It was a golden age, a high point, a vision of what a united and virtuous China could be. After centuries of division following the fall of the Han, China eventually reconsolidated under new dynasties. But it was during the Tang dynasty, beginning in the 7th century, that China entered another golden age, a period marked by cultural brilliance, territorial expansion, and flourishing international exchange. The Tang legacy would ripple far beyond its borders, influencing neighboring civilizations and shaping Chinese identity for generations. The Tang dynasty began in 618 CE under the leadership of the Li family. Its capital, Chang'an, became one of the largest and most cosmopolitan cities in the world. With wide avenues, bustling markets, imperial palaces, and foreign embassies, it was a hub of commerce, governance, and artistic life. Merchants, pilgrims, and scholars arrived from Central Asia, the Middle East, Korea, Japan, and beyond, bringing goods, ideas, and customs into the heart of the empire. The Tang emperors ruled with a blend of Confucian administration, Daoist ritual, and Buddhist patronage. Early rulers such as Taizong and Xuanzong implemented reforms that strengthened central control while promoting education and culture. The civil service examination system, based on Confucian classics, was refined and expanded. This allowed talented individuals from outside the aristocracy to enter government, a meritocratic ideal that would shape China's bureaucracy for centuries. Under Tang rule, China expanded its influence deep into Central Asia, securing trade routes and engaging in diplomatic missions. Military campaigns brought regions such as Tibet, parts of Vietnam, and areas of the Tarim Basin under imperial control. These expansions were often short-lived, but they signaled China's growing confidence and reach. Culturally, the Tang period witnessed an explosion of artistic expression. Poetry flourished, with poets like Li Bai and Du Fu composing verses that captured the beauty, sorrow, and complexity of their times. Painting and calligraphy reached new heights, and Buddhist art adorned caves, temples, and shrines. The blending of Chinese styles with foreign motifs gave Tang art a distinctive and vibrant character. Buddhism enjoyed immense popularity during the Tang dynasty. Monasteries grew wealthy and influential, offering education, shelter, and medical care. Pilgrims traveled to India and brought back scriptures, relics, and ideas. The monk Xuanzang famously journeyed to Nalanda and returned with a vast collection of texts that helped systematize Chinese Buddhist thought. But prosperity was not without peril. In the mid-8th century, the An Lushan rebellion devastated the Tang heartland. Millions perished, cities were destroyed, and the central government never fully recovered its former strength. Though the dynasty limped on for another century, its authority weakened, and regional warlords gained power. Following the Tang, the short-lived but culturally vibrant Song dynasty rose in the 10th century. The Song were notable for their emphasis on scholarship, technology, and economic innovation. They developed gunpowder weaponry, magnetic compasses for navigation, and movable type printing. Urban life expanded, literacy increased, and commercial networks grew within and beyond China. Despite these advances, the Song faced constant military pressure from northern tribes. Eventually, the Jurchen seized the north, and the Song retreated to the south. This division weakened Chinese defenses and made the empire vulnerable to a new, formidable force from the steppes, the Mongols. Led by Genghis Khan and his descendants, the Mongol Empire rapidly expanded across Eurasia in the 13th century. In China, the conquest was led by Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis. After years of warfare, Kublai defeated the southern Song and in 1271 established the Yuan dynasty, the first foreign dynasty to rule all of China. Kublai Khan moved the capital to Dadu, modern-day Beijing, and adopted many aspects of Chinese administration. He retained the civil service system, used Chinese advisors, and attempted to blend Mongol and Chinese traditions. Yet the Yuan dynasty also retained a clear ethnic hierarchy. Mongols occupied the top of the social order, followed by Central Asians, with northern and southern Chinese ranked below. This stratification, along with heavy taxation and forced labor, bred resentment. Trade under the Yuan dynasty expanded significantly. The Mongol Peace, or Pax Mongolica, allowed for relatively safe passage across the Silk Road. Foreigners such as Marco Polo visited the Yuan court and later described the grandeur of Mongol China to the wider world. Maritime commerce also flourished, with Chinese ports linking to Southeast Asia, India, and the Middle East. Despite these achievements, the Yuan dynasty struggled to maintain stability. Internal revolts, economic strain, and environmental challenges, such as floods and crop failures, undermined Mongol rule. The dynasty never fully integrated with its Chinese subjects, and loyalty remained fragile. In the 14th century, rebellions broke out across the country, culminating in the rise of a new native dynasty, the Ming. The Tang through Yuan periods illustrate both the heights and vulnerabilities of imperial China. Under the Tang, China radiated confidence and cultural power. The Song nurtured intellectual and technological brilliance. The Mongols imposed foreign rule but also opened China to the world. Each phase left its mark on governance, on culture, and on the collective memory of a civilization that continued to redefine itself through each era of change. As the Mongols retreated and the Ming stepped forward, China prepared once more to reassert its identity, not only as a territorial power, but as a cultural force deeply rooted in its own traditions. The path to the Ming would be forged in rebellion and renewal, setting the stage for another grand chapter in China's imperial story. As the 14th century wore on, dissatisfaction with Mongol rule boiled over into widespread rebellion. Amid famine, plague, and economic collapse, peasant armies rose in defiance of the Yuan dynasty. Among their leaders was a former monk and soldier named Zhu Yuanzhang. Shrewd, charismatic, and relentless, he would ultimately seize power, overthrow the Mongols, and proclaim the founding of the Ming dynasty in 1368. With that, Chinese rule was restored by a native dynasty, and a new era of consolidation and cultural revival began. Zhu Yuanzhang took the throne as the Hongwu Emperor. From his new capital in Nanjing, he embarked on a vast program of reform and reconstruction. The devastation left by the Yuan collapse had to be addressed. Fields lay fallow, towns abandoned, and institutions weakened. Hongwu re-established traditional Confucian governance, emphasizing hierarchy, order, and moral conduct. He eliminated the Mongol-established aristocracy and centralized power in the emperor's hands, even reducing the influence of his own ministers. The Hongwu emperor distrusted the scholar official class and curtailed the civil service examinations for a time. He established a system where local communities were grouped into units responsible for collective farming and tax duties. To monitor his empire, he created a vast spy network known as the Jinyi Wei, imperial agents tasked with rooting out corruption and dissent. While this strengthened control, it also introduced a climate of fear and authoritarianism that marked much of his reign. Despite this, the early Ming period was one of relative stability. Agriculture recovered, trade resumed, and population levels rebounded. The state supported irrigation works, reforestation efforts, and land redistribution. The Confucian bureaucracy was revived, and scholars once again rose through the ranks by mastering the classics. Under the Ming, Chinese culture experienced a renaissance. Literature, painting, ceramics, and architecture all flourished, deeply rooted in Han traditions, but refined through centuries of evolution. One of the most remarkable chapters of the Ming dynasty was the series of maritime expeditions led by Admiral Zheng He. Between 1405 and 1433, Zheng He commanded 7 voyages across the Indian Ocean, visiting Southeast Asia, India, Arabia, and the coast of East Africa. His massive fleets, some of the largest wooden ships ever built, carried not only goods and soldiers, but diplomats and gifts. These voyages projected Chinese prestige and facilitated tribute relations, but they were not intended for colonization. After Zheng He's final voyage, the Ming court turned inward. The expeditions were discontinued, shipyards fell silent, and maritime trade was restricted. The reasons for this shift are debated. Some cite cost, others fear of foreign influence or renewed nomadic threats in the north. Whatever the cause, the Ming increasingly focused on defending their borders and preserving internal order. One consequence of this inward turn was the strengthening of the Great Wall. While earlier walls had existed for centuries, the Ming constructed and reinforced thousands of kilometers of stone and brick fortifications. These efforts produced the iconic segments of the wall still visible today, massive structures snaking over mountain ridges and deserts, built to repel northern invaders. Administratively, the Ming perfected the imperial bureaucracy. The civil service examination system became more competitive, emphasizing rote memorization of Confucian texts. Successful candidates were appointed to posts across the empire, helping govern a population that reached over 150 million. Local magistrates served as judges, tax collectors, and public works supervisors, key links between the central state and the countryside. Culturally, the Ming Dynasty produced some of the finest examples of Chinese art. Blue and white porcelain reached its peak in both domestic and foreign markets. Classical novels such as Journey to the West and The Water Margin captured the imagination of readers across social classes. Printing technology improved, making books more accessible. The arts were no longer confined to the elite. Urban middle classes consumed drama, painting, and literature on an unprecedented scale. Philosophically, Neo-Confucianism dominated intellectual life. Scholars like Wang Yangming challenged orthodox interpretations, emphasizing introspection and moral intuition. This intellectual ferment stimulated debates about ethics, governance, and the role of the individual. Religion also thrived in various forms. Buddhism remained influential, Daoist practices endured, and local folk beliefs continued to shape daily rituals and festivals. Despite these strengths, the Ming Dynasty eventually faced growing internal and external pressures. Corruption spread within the bureaucracy, court factions paralyzed decision-making, and eunuchs gained excessive influence over the throne. Economic strain from military campaigns, combined with poor harvests and inflation, led to unrest. In the early 17th century, natural disasters, plague, and rebellion once again destabilized the realm. The final blow came from within and without. A peasant uprising led by Li Zicheng overran the capital in 1644. The last Ming emperor hanged himself on a hill outside Beijing. In the chaos, a Ming general opened the gates of the Great Wall to northern Manchu forces, hoping to restore order. Instead, the Manchus seized power and established the Qing dynasty, the last imperial dynasty of China. The Ming had ruled for nearly 3 centuries. Their era was marked by both isolation and brilliance, autocracy and cultural vitality. They restored Chinese rule after Mongol domination, reaffirmed classical ideals, and reshaped the empire into one of the world's most sophisticated civilizations. Even in decline, the Ming left a lasting imprint in architecture, governance, philosophy, and the memory of a time when China, proud and unified, stood at the center of its own world. As the imperial cycle continued with the Qing, the lessons of the Ming lingered. The power of centralized rule, the weight of tradition, and the enduring struggle to balance strength with virtue. The story of China was far from over, but in many ways the Ming represented its last great dynasty before the challenges of modernity would begin to reshape the Middle Kingdom forever.